All right, welcome everyone to the Infinite Expansion podcast brought to you by the Last American Vagabond. I'm going to be your host, Tim. So I brought a friend on today, Marco, someone I actually met at Anarchapulco this past February.
Yep.
Great conference. If you haven't been, met so many great people. And the reason I wanted to bring Marco on is because he's done a lot of really great work over at the Jansen Report, his YouTube channel. I'll put some links in that. About free trade deals. And I really think I've done some work on this. I've done a couple articles on it, but it's such an important topic that isn't really being talked about. It like kind of goes in spurts. We talk about it a little, even though it really doesn't get much mainstream attention, and then it just goes away. And with the utter importance of this topic and what it's aiming to do, because it's not just one trade deal, it's multiple trade deals, and they're not going away. There seems like there's only going to be more coming. I wanted to really branch out into this topic more, give people more information, not just on the TPP, but on some other trade deals going on, and kind of what are the global ramifications of it. So without further ado, I wanted to toss the ball to Marco here. First, could you kind of, because I know everyone's waking up at different times, and there might be some people who aren't so familiar with free trade deals. So maybe give a little explanation on what free trade deals are and kind of what are the current ones being negotiated right now.
Sure, Tim. Yes, well, free trade agreements are originally meant to facilitate trade between participating countries. So countries participating in these deals, what they aim to do is to reduce trade barriers. That is, usually tariffs are imposed, when you want to protect your country from outside influences, when you're saying, okay, well, I have an industry that's relatively strong, or maybe internationally speaking, relatively weak, but in order to conserve my economy, I will impose trade barriers to kind of install some protectionism. That is, to protect your own industries. Now, what free trade deals do is to expand the market for your country and that other country or other nations participating in this deal by lowering those trade tariffs, those trade barriers, and to allow resources to flow more freely, and mostly goods and services. So it's really the aim is to broaden the market for players within those countries by actually lowering trade barriers. That's basically it. Usually the capital and labor are not included in those trade agreements. In some cases they are, but it's basically mostly about goods and services and regulating that.
And what are some of the trade deals currently going on right now? As I know there's a few being negotiated at the moment.
Yes, well, there have been free trade agreements for a long time. Of course, you all probably know NAFTA, and the North American Free Trade Agreement. The European Union kind of started as something like that, although it's much more, of course, now. And towards the end of the 90s, I did some research in the Mercado Común del Sur, which is a South American sort of a free trade deal. But right now, we're seeing some very controversial trade agreements, and we're talking about Trans-Pacific Partnership, which includes Asia-Pacific countries, about 11 of them, and the United States. And we have the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, the TTIP, which includes the United States and the European Union. So these are two very large bodies, together comprising far more than half of the world economy. So they are as a really large trade agreements. But other ones are TISA, the Trade in Services Agreement, also including dozens of nations. And we have CETA, which is it's actually an agreement between Canada and the European Union. It's called the Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement, CETA. So there's a lot going on right now, yes.
Yeah, I was just going deeper into all these trade deals, and it's very interesting to see the countries in it and also the countries not included, like some of the big ones like China and Russia and India, all the BRICS nations, basically. But anyways, so what are some of the reasons that the politicians are giving to the public to sell these? Because they can't just pass these. Well, even though a lot of people aren't paying attention anyways, what are the reasons they're giving to sell these to us?
Well, the reasons they're particularly giving is that it will boost the economy, of course, and it will be good also for small and medium-sized companies because their market will expand, and by lowering the trade tariffs and making regulation much more equal between those nations, the governments say, well, it will boost the economy. It will increase the GDP of all participating nations, and sometimes they're even referring to growth in other countries because of the free trade agreements between these nations. So it's they usually do that by all kinds of models that they're applying, calculations that they're having made by instances like the European Center for Economic Policy Research and all these different types of bodies. They're also actually using independent parties to assess the influence of these free trade agreements on the economy, and mostly they're positive. They give growth figures, GDP, for instance, for TTIP in the European Union, let's say in the tens of billions of euros over the next years. Annualized growth of about 0.5% of GDP in the European Union, and the United States about 0.4%, I think it was. Yeah, generally positive arguments that they're giving for these trade agreements.
Of course, they're always perfect for us.
Yes.
But once we dive deeper into them and we start looking under the hood, and we know from past free trade deals and kind of seeing how those have panned out, usually that's not how they work. So I wanted you to give a little bit of I want to give a little explanation on how they work under the hood and kind of what the real purpose is behind these free trade deals.
Yes, the real purpose is it's kind of you can derive that from these texts, and the one thing that I think is a strong indication why these agreements are kind of dangerous, maybe, is that they're so secretive. I mean, if it's just a free trade agreement, if that's all it is, then why all the secrecy in the negotiations and the ratification, everything surrounding these free trade agreements? Backdoors, really. So that really should stir some controversy, and it does. In fact, it does stir a lot of controversy, especially within the European Union when you refer to TTIP. But when you look under the hood of these agreements, you can also look at Wikileaks, and Greenpeace recently leaked some texts of the TTIP. When you really study those documents, then you find some very strange, let's say, laws in there, such as intellectual property, which reaches very, very far internationally. Of course, they are trying to defend intellectual property to the extreme, where intellectual property rights will actually transcend nation rights, if you will. And also the role of so-called investment state dispute bodies, or this is the ISDS. It currently recently changed to some other term, but investor state dispute system. It's I think it is. It's really like let's call it a judicial system outside of the countries, actually transgressing the country laws. And what it basically is that companies can sue governments. That's what it basically comes down to. They can sue governments for potential losses and what have you. So that I think makes it very dangerous to have these treaties in place, because we the people can actually be paying the bill for losses of governments, losses of companies who are suing our governments. And this is the ISDS is actually separate from governments. It's like a closed system, very secretive as well. And ISDS systems have been around in other treaties as well. So the controversy is actually a little bit isolated in this case, because since they've been around for a while, people are asking, okay, so why is it so bad right now? Why are we looking at this right now? But I think because this involves a lot of nations, and it actually takes it a step further, it spurs a lot of controversy, where the rights of nations are being taken away in certain areas, and are favoring the corporations. And when you look at these dispute settlement systems, it's really usually only the corporations that can use them. There are several cases, several examples, also in the UK, for instance, and in Canada mostly also, where mostly the large corporations will have the means to sue these governments, and when it comes to the rights of the smaller and medium-sized companies, well, you don't see that happening. They don't have the means to do so, and for them, there's no real added value to use these dispute settlement systems. So it really favors the corporations, and that's why I think that when you look at these intellectual property rights, which also has implications for our food. When companies such as Monsanto can create variations on our vegetables, for instance, and then patent them, these intellectual property rights will give them power over nations to protect their vegetables from being used, from being grown by smaller companies and by individuals. So this is also posing a threat to our food system at large, and not just that, but also control over let's say international agriculture. There's so much going on there, which makes this very dangerous, I think.
Yeah, no, I mean, my personal take, exactly what yours is, that this is, if you don't believe that world governance is coming about, I mean, this is your proof right here. You're taking huge swaths of area, like, for example, in the TPP, you're taking all these Southeast Asian countries plus America and few South American countries, and you're basically creating a standardized set of rules that transcend domestic rules. And our ability to use our domestic courts to pass laws that are effective are no longer the rule of the land. Now we have another layer of unelected officials that can trump our domestic law.
That's
and
right.
So we thought we could affect policy in our own country. How are we going to affect it internationally to unelected bodies? So people have to wake up to what's going on here. I wanted to go on a couple small subjects before we go a little farther. I find what do some of these trade deals have in store for, say, internet protection and also climate change? And I want to say this in terms of climate change. What does it have in, not just not the carbon permit trading scam, but more the ability, like, how is this going to affect the environment in terms of globalization with these trade deals? It seems like it's going to be worse for the environment, even though they're going to promote it as a way to stop climate change.
Yes, I think. Well, I've looked into the aspect of products that can be used, that are banned in Europe, for instance, right now, such as Roundup by Monsanto. These glyphosate, I think it's called, types of products, which are really poison. Basically, they are banned in Europe right now. But this would the TTIP, for instance, would allow these products to be entering the European Union. And to be sold here in the EU, for instance. So in that sense, I haven't looked very deep into these and all the other environmental issues. But when it comes to environmental protection, I think it will be harder to protect the environment from a local perspective, from a national perspective. And yeah, basically also because of the power of these corporations who will be able to sell their, let's call it poison, on multiple markets. And also, when these markets grow, their economic influence will grow, and they will be able to capture entire markets. So for instance, Monsanto, which I've been talking about, they've created let's say a lot of destruction in other nations by destroying complete agricultural areas. Such as in Brazil, there's been a lot of protests from Brazilian farmers. There were examples of 5 million farmers protesting against Monsanto because they completely took over the markets there, including being able to sell Roundup, et cetera, which is of course a large pollutant. And not just the environment, but also the food. It pollutes our food as well, and I think that's another dangerous aspect. But when it comes to other environmental issues, I haven't really focused on that, to be honest. There's so much that you can research in these trade agreements, and I decided to focus on TTIP mostly, and specifically focusing on the ramifications concerning the like I said, the ISDS and what's going on there, and the basic implications for our economies. So what I've been doing is also assessing, the models that are used for calculating the positive impacts on our economies. And I think when you look into that, there are a lot of fallacies. But what is your take on these environmental issues?
Well, I guess, I'm trying to bring as many people and groups into the conversation as possible. And when you think about globalization, we're shipping products from Europe to the US when we can grow them right here. And so all this movement of products that we can grow locally is not as, first off, that's more impact on the environment. And as well, it's destroying local economies because we could grow them right here. We could grow our economies domestically, and as opposed to shipping products all the way across the world that we could grow easily in our backyards. And this is beside, this doesn't even go into like what you just talked about, how if we pass a domestic environmental law, we don't want our air polluted at a certain magnitude. Well, that goes against the agreement, and so the company can sue us. But I think it goes even a step further, in this whole globalization of everything is really, not beneficial from an environmental standpoint, but also from an economical standpoint of, building our own economies. And I wanted to use this to branch into another subject that we didn't talk about as much, but I think is very interesting. Because, we both went to the anarcho-capitalist conference, and we believe in, free markets and freedom. But how do we find the balance between protecting our economies? Because I do believe in protecting your own and growing your local economies. How do we find the balance between protecting our economies, from big corporations just coming in and pillaging them, but also open barriers and open trade? Because I think there's some type of balance there that needs to be talked about in an open, I think, manner.
Yeah, when it comes to that, I guess one other aspect, what you just referred to, and the question with regard to the environment, of course, when you look at pollution, I think that's an important thing also with the shipping worldwide that you mentioned. But on the other hand, I have strong doubts regarding the climate change narrative with CO2 and everything. So I tend to dismiss that one a little bit, that argument, because I think adding CO2 to our that's my personal thought, and done some research into that.
I'm with you on that.
I don't think adding CO2 to our environment or to our system here, to our ecosystem, would probably spur the growth of trees and plants, which would then provide us with more oxygen. So I would think CO2 growth is not a problem, but this is, of course, the agenda being pushed by many parties here. But yes, there are other ways of pollution that we will definitely see a rising, especially with these products that I mentioned, such as Roundup and the poisons that are entering our markets worldwide. Then, which I am concerned about. Then the next point: how do you find the balance when it comes to these to the free markets on the one hand, and let's say preventing corporations from taking over everything? I think when you look at the legislation, I think you have to look at both sides. It's not just protectionism that we have to look at from a nation perspective. We have to have that because of other regulations, because of patenting, because of the rights that are protected mostly of the corporations right now, and allowing them to use sweatshops and to exploit entire continents such as Africa. When you allow these systems to happen, then you should have some protectionism in your local markets to be able to have a thriving local economy. Otherwise, it will be a global economy, and corporations will take over because their products probably are always going to be cheaper. And until some kind of notion amongst people arises, when people waking up, as the terms that you and I guess both use, to this paradigm where we say, okay, we should stop these corporations from pretty much ruining our food and our agriculture and everything. But that would mean that masses of people will have to wake up and then stop choosing to buy those products and choosing local produce over those products. So I think when you talk about a balance and with protecting your own national market versus keeping the corporations out and making sure that they don't capture the entire market, I think it has to start with international legislation allowing these corporations to pay almost zero taxes in several countries, to use sweatshops and lower their costs in that way, and to do something against that at first. And then you can, I think, pretty much free up the markets, because then it will be a more level playing field for small players and large players to compete. But because of, like I said, because of all the advantages that corporations are getting, paying almost no tax. With the Panama Papers you saw recently, as an example. But the corporations are having such great times striking deals with national governments. The Netherlands, where I'm from, I'm based in the Netherlands actually. We are famous for, or infamous, if you will, for striking huge deals with multinational corporations, with them paying almost no taxes whatsoever. So the Netherlands is also playing a part in that as a tax haven. I think that creating those circumstances allows these corporations to produce very cheaply and to compete everyone away.
Yeah, I really agree. We have to stop subsidizing the big companies.
In essence.
And I also think, there's such a personal responsibility that comes with free markets. You have to purchase with your dollar. You have to buy what you want to see manifest. And the problem is so many people are paying no attention and they're not awake. And so they're participating in systems that are totally against what they want to see. And so if people don't wake up and get more knowledgeable on these things and realize what these things are doing to our cultures, to our environment, to our economic systems, it's never going to change. So I agree. It's almost like, we might have to protect in some ways. And then as the system manifests better, maybe we can lower those barriers more and more. But if people aren't educated and awake to participating in the economy the way they want to see, then really there's some dangers, I think, with lowering barriers, because it's not really free trade too. They're subsidizing the companies that, they're subsidizing the big companies, and the big companies, their capital and logistics are so good that, like you said, they're always going to have a cheaper price. And with people not paying attention, they're just going to go to the low prices, and then that's going to make it worse. So there's definitely a balance there. And I think it's important for, anarchists and capitalists and even, progressives to understand these, the importance of protection sometimes, I think, and also free trade. It's a balance. But moving on to the next question, what's been the reaction?
Tim, sorry, just adding one thing to that. I think it's when it comes to free trade, real free trade, I think we also should have really free markets. And a lot of people don't realize that most of the markets are not free, such as the gold market and silver market. They're rigged. There's a lot of evidence of that, but also other commodities and because of all these deals that are struck, big banks playing roles in really rigging those markets, but also international markets for agriculture, for industry goods. Most of the game is rigged anyway. So having a free market in that sense is practically impossible in the current situation.
Right. No, I couldn't agree more. I think it's. I wish we could have a really good debate with like anarcho-capitalists or capitalists and progressives, so like kind of democratic socialists, because I think a lot of these people, they're kind of on our team in a way. They want similar things, but they want to. I don't think they fully understand. I was kind of in this camp, and they don't fully understand the markets and how economics, how the governments play in, and how it's not really capitalism. It's not really free trade. They don't see all the subsidizing going behind the scenes, how the government, they see the government's corrupt, but I don't think they fully understand all the aspects, because a lot of these people agree on many areas. Like progressives are against these trade deals. So they're kind of on our team in a way. I wish we could bridge this gap better. Like Sanders supporters and a lot of them actually mean well. I know they mean well. They're good. They're good people. They don't understand some of the history behind, like they put too much trust in the government, and they don't really understand, I think, free trade in a way. It'd be nice to bridge that gap, because we need to build bridges as opposed to kind of fighting each other. But anyways, what's been the reaction? You can also give what's been like the reaction to people, and maybe you can go a little specifically in what's been happening in Europe as far as the reaction, because you're over there, you have the eyes on the ground there. What's the reaction there as well?
Well, when it comes to TTIP, especially since the leaks by Greenpeace recently, earlier this month, May, it was in May, we've seen masses of people out on the streets protesting against TTIP. Actually, last Saturday, there were protests throughout Europe against TTIP. And a lot of people are starting to understand the implications, the ramifications of this deal. And what we've also seen is that over the past months already, that EU politicians are kind of realizing, they're kind of scratching their head, wondering what's with all the secrecy, and this doesn't feel right. So I think this MEP is a European Parliament member, Luke Flanagan, Irish Parliament member, European Parliament member. He recorded a video where he showed how secretive the ratification of this deal is, where he had to go alone into an EU building, and he just walked through the hallways and was led to a room without any windows. And he talked about, okay, now I have to go in here, and I only have an hour, and I can't talk to anyone, etc., etc. So it's an interesting video that to which I have a link on one of my earlier reports, and it all shows that it's highly secretive, and there's a lot of controversy surrounding this TTIP. And next to the masses waking up in Europe, there are also politicians waking up, and especially the investor state dispute settlement system that I refer to, the ISDS, has been confronted with a lot of resistance from EU politicians, and they've actually tried to stop it. So they've kind of proposed a different type of system, which is also like an investor disputes type of system, but they call it an investor court system. Well, whatever, it's a little bit different, but in essence, I don't think it's going to change a whole lot. But at least we're seeing some resistance from EU Parliament members. And the deal is still not entirely through in Europe. So I think that's a good sign. Also, François Hollande, the French president, has been very public about opposing the TTIP in one way or another. So there's some interesting developments going on there.
There's been some big protests, over in Europe.
Yes, massive protests against TTIP, but also other types of protests. I mean, when you talk about protests, you should also talk about Nuit debout. Nuit debout means like nightly upstanding or standing up against something, during the night. And Nuit debout is now spreading throughout Europe, and TTIP is among those topics discussed by citizens, just citizens standing on squares in Paris, in Amsterdam, all over Europe, in dozens and dozens of countries at night, discussing different political topics, economic issues, these free trade agreements, and really coming up with new demonstrations or new ways to stand up against these developments. And it's not just the free trade agreements; it's much more than that. It's also a labor law. That's what it started with, Nuit debout in Paris, a labor law that was introduced recently and that they're demonstrating against. And it's very interesting to see that a lot of people are now starting to stand up, but the coverage in the mainstream media is kind of minimal, if you will. So minimal at best, and what they show is usually negative. It's usually, fights with police, riots, and sometimes I wonder whether it's really coming from these protests. If that's really the cause, or maybe something else. They don't really tell that, but there's a lot of stuff going on in Europe right now.
Yeah, you got to watch out for those instigators, paid instigators. A lot of people don't understand these people who get paid. Yeah, who get paid. And it's not to say it happens every time, but there are a lot of those out there. But yeah, I know you did a video on I'm going to butcher the name. What is the name again?
Nuit debout.
Yes.
Nuit debout. So it's
Nuit debout. I'm gonna put a link in the show notes for that, for people to check that out, because I know you did a good video on that, and probably a lot of them, at least North American listeners probably haven't heard. I didn't even know about it until I saw your video. So something to check out. And it's nice to see, I feel like Europeans, in a certain sense, are a little bit more they take a little bit more action when their government is going. I don't know, maybe you correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like Americans are really asleep. They're not paying. If I went on the street and asked someone what the TPP was, I bet 95% would have no idea what it is, let alone like they wouldn't even have heard of the term, let alone actually know what it is. And I feel like at least Europeans are a little bit more awake to these things than a lot of Americans. Hopefully we will wake up more, because
I hope so. Yeah, yeah. It's taken quite a while in Europe as well. I think, especially in the Netherlands, we've been kind of, I think we're relatively well-to-do over here when you look at Europe. So in terms of wealth, I think Europe or the Netherlands is still doing relatively well, although we do have very high taxes, and people are feeling that as well. And I think about 10% of the Dutch population is now living under the poverty line. So this is increasing rapidly. And I think with with all the problems that we're facing right now, including of course the migrant crisis that we're having right now, there's a lot going on, and people are now massively waking up. And in Germany, this has been going on for a while. And in Munich and for instance, Munich and Berlin, there have been uprisings for years now. Even there's a movement that you have in the U.S. as well. I think it's based in the U.S. It's End the Fed movement. So it's against the Federal Reserve. They actually had a quite a big uprising in I think it was Berlin a couple of years ago. It was kind of isolated, but yes, I think it's a good thing that people are currently waking up, and there's much more that we should do than just roaming the streets and protesting. I think there's a lot more that we can do. So that should be the next phase.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think first, so I'm always a big believer in it's information, it's knowledge first. I mean, if you don't have the proper knowledge, you're not going to take the proper actions, because you're not guided by the right principles in a way. But just two last questions. What's the current state of these trade deals? What's going on with them right now, so people can get up to date on what the current process is right now?
Yeah, when it comes to TPP, the other big one that we shouldn't forget about, I think it's pretty much agreed in the sense, and there's a ratification process going on right now. So it looks like it's almost final. When it comes to the TTIP in Europe, it's still, like I said, still under negotiation. There's lots of resistance from the population. Last Saturday, multiple protests throughout Europe, and some politicians also standing up against it. So I think TTIP is in danger of being blocked entirely. I don't think ultimately that will happen. I think they will find a way to come up with certain mitigations of risks within those treaties. So ultimately, I think they're probably going to ratify this treaty, but hopefully with some amendments that will make it a little bit better. But right now, TTIP is still up for debate. It's not done by a long shot.
Yeah, no, I think from what I understand, TPP is basically all the countries. So they agreed, all the countries, but now they have to ratify it domestically in all the countries. And right. I believe they have 2 years to do that. So it's definitely not over, but if the current state continues in the U.S. where no one talks about it, no one pays attention, well, yeah, then it's probably just going to get steamrolled through. But at least you see you see at least, I'm not a Sanders supporter, but you see Sanders talking about it. You even see Trump talking about it. I'm not a Trump supporter either, but you see him talking about it. I don't know how much I believe him, but he's talking about it. So we'll see.
Who do you support? Well, you're a little bit of an anarchist, I guess. So
yeah, I don't support any of the candidates. I don't even like the new libertarian candidate. His VP was in the Council on Foreign Relations. They have a lot of Koch brothers funding behind that campaign. So I think that movement kind of sold out. I mean, I'm not opposed to using some of the political process to embark change. I'm not someone who's just like, oh, we got to completely ignore it. I don't think we're ready for anarchy, and I'm not even necessarily I think you're always going to find structures of law, but I'm just a big advocate of decentralization of power, and so I'm more the awakening is going to continue regardless of the election. And I did an article on this, and it's going to continue. And so we can change the ship anytime. We don't have to wait 4 years again. We could change it anytime. And there's all these new fascinating things coming out, like cryptocurrencies and also the gold and silver markets opening up. And I think we need to enact change in our local communities. I mean, we need to test these ISDSs. Okay, well, we're going to pass laws, and then we're not going to pay the company if they're going to sue us. There are other ways around this. It's not like, there's ways around this. I don't think that, what are they going to do? Come in with the army and come after us? I mean, I dare them. I mean, we'll see. But I don't think then it becomes too obvious what they're doing. And in that regard, I don't know if they can get away with that. But they'll get away with it if we just stand there and let them take over. So I'm kind of more involved in the movements happening behind the scenes at the moment, at least, and spreading information and getting the word out. I think that's more effective than me going to the polls and voting. Now, if there was like some Ron Paul in there, I'd probably be more apt to vote. But I don't think there's anyone in there that really represents the people in any way. I guess if I had to choose, I guess a libertarian candidate, but I don't really. To be honest, I'm kind of tired of the whole election process. It's just a bit. I just hope Hillary gets indicted, and I just hope things start changing. I just hope people start waking up. But unfortunately, I don't think a lot of people are going to wake up until they get slapped in the face. And I think with the coming financial crisis that's coming and the new paradigm, I think they're going to be slapped in the face pretty soon. And so we will see what happens. Hopefully, people can get with all this alternative media out there now, there'll be spots where they can go to and then start to understand why this happened, as opposed to being like, oh, government, save us. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But anyway, so last question. Where do you see all this going? And I'll give a brief what I see kind of happening, because you see in the TPP, you see the Southeast Asian countries kind of shifting towards the U.S. It's the trade deal with the Southeast Asia and some South American. You see with the TTIP, Europe, the European Union coming into a U.S. trade agreement. And then you see with the TISA, you see some more South American countries. You see like Israel, Hong Kong, some of the Nordic countries coming in. So you see like this alliance being built of the U.S. and all these countries. And then who do you not see in those? It's like you see, you don't see Brazil, Russia, China, BRICS. You don't see Iran, some of these Eurasian countries. And then you got Middle East and Africa. You don't see in those. But it seems like, from my personal view, that they're shifting a lot of Asian countries away from China. They're shifting Europe away from Russia and Eurasia, and they're shifting South America away from Brazil. And then, as we said earlier, they're already all over the Middle East, so they're just pillaging those resources just like they are in Africa. So they don't even need to do free trade deals because they just pillage the resources. So it seems like they're isolating these other countries that are big emerging economies and more power players in the world, kind of like, kind of creating this void between the two, this rivalry in a way between the two. How do you see that dynamic playing out? And do you think all these free trade deals are going to go through, or do you think people are going to start to wake up?
I hope the latter. Of course, I hope the people are going to wake up. But there are multiple dynamics at play here. Of course, China has been getting stronger. They've been purchasing gold like crazy. So monetarily, they're also gaining strength in that sense. Although their economy is built on a bubble, basically. They have a huge number of bubbles in there, debt bubble, and I guess also an infrastructure bubble, housing bubble, if you will, and a lot of corporate debt. So, but they have recently, I think it was 2 years ago, they introduced the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, and they have been able to pull in a lot of Western countries as well, who are now working with the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. As opposed to, for instance, the IMF and the World Bank. So it seems like more of a balance there. And of course, we've been seeing bilateral agreements between China and Russia, for instance, in kind of circumventing the dollar. So in that sense, what they want to do is to do trade with one another without having to use the dollar in their settlements. And this is a big blow to the U.S. dollar, I think, at least potentially, because China is also a large holder of U.S. debt, as you know, dollar reserves that they have, and that they maybe could be sending back to the U.S., which would be a big problem for the U.S. So yeah, I think the empire of the U.S. has been getting a few blows, and at least economically. You know, militarily, of course, they're still U.S. are still kind of rolling out all their arms and troops everywhere, but economically, it's a challenge. And yeah, I think Russia, especially China, has been getting stronger, and they've been negotiating these deals amongst one another. And maybe this is just a way to isolate them and to regain strength also economically. But yeah, I don't know. On the other hand, I think this is also another step towards like a world system, like a world government, and maybe even ultimately world currency. You know, the whole new world order thing that we've been seeing. It's kind of been under the radar for a lot of people. We've seen politicians talk about the new world order. Of course, several U.S. presidents announcing it's time for a new world order. So I think these forces are going on, and maybe, but that's speculation from my side. I have to be honest about that. Maybe China and Russia are some of the opposing powers to the new world order. Maybe they're in on it, and this is just one big game. But I think you know. On a grand scheme of things, this is another move, another step towards this integrated world system of global control. And I hope people do see that. Whether or not it's, you know, China and Russia are in on it or not, it really doesn't matter. I think we should wake up and we should be able to see the big picture here, and we should all stand up against this. And what we can do, you know, you briefly touched upon that, but it's protests, it's petitions. I've been actually signing tons of petitions against Monsanto, against the TTIP, against TPP, against all these things. And even in the Netherlands, there's been a debate in Parliament because of such a petition on the monetary system. So there are some things also surfacing by civilians' actions. And I think if we continue to do that, and we, in the meantime, we try to avoid the current system, such as the financial system. We can do Bitcoin, we can do other cryptocurrencies, we can do other monetary systems that we that we can use to avoid the current debt-based fiat currency, a usury system that we have internationally. Then there's still a lot more that we can do, and hopefully we can then force them on their knees. It's just by not accepting what they're doing anymore. By going around their financial system, which is, I think, the head of the snake, because through the financial system and making interest on money that you create out of nothing, that only, you know, is for the benefit of a certain small group of elites. If we go around that, then we already have a big step forward to be, you know, to try to stop these developments.
Yeah, well said. One thing I was thinking too, even if they enact all these trade deals, but if the U.S. dollar collapses, well, I bet these trade deals will probably collapse too. So it's not, you know, while they might pass it, you know, like I said, we could change the ship anytime. I mean, we can test these, and I don't think they can hold. I mean, what army do they have? Like a, you know, I don't see them, like, because they have to overtly then protect these, you know, like overt actions with like armies and stuff. And I don't know if that's going to happen, but we'll see. But I think that'll wrap it up here. I do hope people look into this information more. I hope they did learn something here, and not just to use, but then to take it and expand upon it. You know, there's so much more out there. We need all eyes and ears on the ground. Spread the information, even if it's not this video. Spread other videos. That's the only way. It's really a war on the mind right now. We need to wake more people up. I always think that the wheels of change will turn once enough people are woken up. So I do hope people will continue to spread this. Marco, thanks again for joining us. Hopefully we can do this again another time. And I hope everyone listening learned something. And thanks again. Have a good day.
Thanks for having me on, Tim. Talk to you later.